Small businesses are at the heart of the U.S. economy. Here at Nurture Small Business Podcast, we're dedicated to seeing our small business owners succeed. I am your host, Denise Kagan, president of DCA Virtual Business Support. If you like what you hear on today's podcast, please share it. You have my gratitude for doing so. Today's guest has a relentless focus on achieving outcomes while developing strong cultures and employee engagement. Nicknamed the turnaround queen by former colleagues and employers, Victoria inspires and empowers her team and clients to change mindsets and drive growth in business, leadership, and culture. Welcome to the show, Victoria. I should have asked you ahead of time. Pelletier?
Okay.
Pelletier. Oh my goodness.
It's okay. We can blame my French-Canadian husband for that one.
So Victoria, how are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Happy to be here.
And I'm very excited to have you here today. You know, culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion, employee engagement are all very hot topics right now. Not just hot topics, but relevant topics because employers are struggling getting talent through the doors and retaining talents. COVID and the pandemic has kind of left some things in its wake that has influenced that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you said, it's been out there for a long time and critically important, but I think people in general have gone through, and I hate kind of the media terms, the great resignation, the great rethink, whatever you want to name it. But the reality is we've given a lot of thought to what life looks like for us as employees. And I say life because it's all very much integrated. You know, we stared in this box of, four walls around into our homes as we were working. And so I just think it's caused people to really evaluate the purpose that they have wanting to work with organizations and do work that aligns with their values and makes them feel like they're having an impact.
Absolutely. And the remote work culture, I do a lot of reading on that because my team is completely remote, and I want to keep my thumb on the pulse, so to speak. But there's some unique challenges in remote and hybrid work cultures. Do you work in that area as well?
I do. I've been really fortunate that a lot of my, what I call sort of a maniacal focus on building strong leadership teams, that thereby an outcome of that is having great company culture. It's been my day job, quite frankly, for almost the last decade, where I've been leading teams that support clients with their HR and workforce strategy, consulting with them on how to improve their organization and their workforce. So again, a passion has become much more of a day job. And when the pandemic first hit, the conversation was all about what the return to work was going to look like. And now this is the new normal, as you said, Denise. It's hybrid. In some cases, it's fully remote still. And so what we've seen is the pendulum actually swinging. So initially, as some of the pandemic protocols and were being relieved, we saw some employers demanding people back in the office, and they saw the effect of that and chose to leave. And so then they had to backpedal a little bit more into creating more of a hybrid opportunity for them, listening to their employees with what they wanted. But there's also this, as much as employees might want to work remotely, there's still a lot that's gained by being face-to-face with people, just collaborating casually by the proverbial water cooler, and just the innovation and spark that comes. So I think most companies are going to need to look at being really flexible around what that looks, meeting the demands of their employees, but also in a way that it still fosters this great culture and innovation and collaboration.
Absolutely. And I would say not just from the employee's perspective, but from the leader's perspective, if you're not accustomed to leading remotely, it's different.
It is. We need to teach leaders how to go beyond the seeing bums in seats, physical seats, as a way of trying to identify productivity and performance, instead lead in a very different capacity. And that's where I think there's this shift towards much more responsible, human-centered leadership. And many companies promote their top performers, their top individual performers into leadership, and it doesn't necessarily translate into them being amazing leaders. So they need some coaching and support over what this looks like in this new dynamic, how to engage authentically, transparently, how to demonstrate trust of their employees who are now going to be working remotely and without the opportunity for them to physically see in the office, and also managing the I'm going to call a paradox that exists between employees who say they want one thing and then sometimes do the other and flip flop. And the example is, we say we want to eat incredibly healthy and we buy our dogs, the best, fresh food, and then we go and buy something for ourselves from McDonald's. And so that's the kind of thing that happens in the workplace, and leaders need to adjust much more to that, and really build these strong rapport and relationship with their employees when they're not sitting side by side daily.
Absolutely. So let's dive into that just a little bit. Give me some hot, actionable tips, strategies, maybe a little more depth than tips, that leaders can, put in their back pocket and refer to so they can create that engagement and create that trust, because you talked about the trust factor as well. So what are some of the things that leaders can do?
Well, I think sort of starting from entry point through the entire employee life cycle. I think there's a significant amount of work that needs to be done right now, as we know there's a war for talent and challenges finding employees to create a strong employer brand. And so this isn't owned by the HR. I talked to a lot of CHROs around how do they engage with marketing, for example, to build the strong employee value proposition that is more than just their compensation. So how do you attract employees up front? You mentioned diversity and inclusion, something incredibly close to my heart. So ideally, a diverse workforce, but not just bringing them in the door. The next part is how do you maintain them within that organization? So you're starting with building a strong employee value proposition to attract the right kind of people by aligning their values with the organizational purpose and mission. And as leaders, importantly, making sure that's brought down to the individual employee. They might just be doing administrative work or stocking shelves, but understanding how every piece of the work that they do contributes and has impact to the overarching objective of the organization. And then I'd say it's critically important to make sure you're very clear with employees around what success looks like and how it's measured. So there's no surprises when we need to talk about performance, and being critically clear about that. And also, and this one's it's interesting, and a lot of my career has been spent in Fortune 500 global organizations, publicly traded. So there's going to be incentives to employees to drive revenue or drive profitability, but understanding how those incentives drive behavior within your workforce. So getting the other elements that you should be measuring. So another, piece of advice would be when you look at the performance scorecard, that you make sure that success is measured much more holistically, multifaceted, not just around the productivity or financial metrics, but also around the things you're trying to drive within the workforce. If you're a leader, they should also be measured upon their team satisfaction and engagement, not just productivity. If it is about diversity and inclusion, seeing the needle move forward for, again, those that are in a position to hire. Seeing the scores when it comes to the employee engagement and asking, a really key question, would you recommend this place of employment to a friend or family member? And then to the building trust piece, that comes down to how you lead at a one-on-one level, regular, meetings, one-on-one, understanding the career progression desire for those employees in terms of where they want to go with their own career, and being vulnerable and making employees feel like you trust them and you have their back.
So let's zoom into that building trust. And that's a fantastic, high level overview of, what you need to do to attract and retain talent. And what I'd like to do is zoom in on that, particularly that creating trust factor, as well as, in a remote and hybrid environment, there are some slight nuances that are a little different. And if you could just zoom in there and give me some ideas of what can leaders do now to create that trust?
I think I learned the hard way many years ago, Denise. I was moved into an executive leadership role at a very young age, and it was a stretch role for me. And so, the imposter syndrome was real for me. And so I showed up a certain way that I wanted to demonstrate, that I belonged there. I needed to be there. I was all business all the time. And I, got an unfortunate nickname as the Iron Maiden. And so I had to undo some of that. I was like, well, that's not me. Like I cry at, the Humane Society commercials, like I'm all marshmallow inside. And so for me, it required showing up in a way that wasn't natural or comfortable for me. And I wasn't sure how my own leadership would view me for being vulnerable, I used earlier. And so that meant I needed to show up my whole self, my whole person. When I talked to and coached and mentored people, talked about, they always wanted to understand, how did I get to the position I did, particularly at such a young age? For me, that meant being vulnerable and sharing my backstory. That is actually my why. If Simon Sinek, start with why, like that is my why. And it's what drove me, forward, to be so driven from a work perspective. And so that would be the first piece of advice. And it's creating this vulnerability and openness and building like real relationship with our employees, not just the, leader employee dynamic. And so that means having, and in this remote environment, more importantly, because you're not bumping into each other and, at the coffee station, setting and living by the, not canceling consistently, the one-on-one meetings with people.
So creating that safe space, even though you're not necessarily being friends with them, creating just that rapport that allows them to feel comfortable sharing with you.
Yeah. And you need to do that as the leader, to open up and as you said, make it feel safe. So I think that's critically important. And I'm a big fan of, I have like with my team every 2 or 3 weeks, that's a standing meeting. They can ping me anytime, we can talk as needed, but they know that that's the one spot we're saving to have that conversation. There's a big part around, I think, making employees feel like that as your leader. They can trust you, but trust, has been built upon how you've demonstrated how you go to bat for them. So much of my career has been in an executive role. And when I'm talking about the state of the business and, delivering quarterly or annual business reviews to people, or where there's areas we haven't performed, I'm the leader. I own it. I stand in front of my leadership and make that known. There might be someone on my team that contributed very specifically to something that went wrong, but I'm not looking to put them out on the carpet for that. Again, that's my accountability. And then I subsequently will have the one-on-one conversation to make sure that I'm coaching and I'm providing them the guidance to get to acceptable levels of performance. And you know what? We're all going to fail. And so giving people permission to fail, but learning from it and getting up and moving forward.
Absolutely. I love that. So you mentioned Simon Sinek's why, and that is your why. So tell me about it.
Well, so I'm born to a drug addicted teenage mother who was exceptionally abusive to me, and I went in and out of the child welfare system. I'm one of the fortunate ones who was adopted into a loving home. My parents, however, came from not a high socioeconomic status. My dad was a school janitor, and my mom a secretary. And I remember my mom, and my mom is the woman that adopted me, that she said to me at some point, "Tori, you need to do better than us." And she meant by education and by, vocationally, but she never needed to say that to me, because I was determined that I would be better than the biology that I was born into and that woman, and also the circumstance and, which I was raised within. And I had a multitude of other, adversities that, came my way through my childhood as well. And that's what's driven me. It's because I started working at age 11 in a hair salon. And then at 14, I was the assistant manager for the shoe store I worked at. And I realized I was in complete control of how I showed up at work, learning the skills to be successful and deliver, having a strong work ethic. And so for me, work was the one thing I felt I had that control around. So that's my why. A lot of people, ask me, again, to the levels I've achieved at a very young age, but I also started working at a young age, to this very A-type driven nature. I'm a bit of a do as I say, not as I do. I'm not very good when I go on vacation. I don't disconnect by choice. I don't take conference calls, but I'm on my phone. I don't want to come back to, a million emails, and that's my choice. So I'll say, do as I say, not as I do. But I try and explain to people where it comes from and what it, drives me. It's not all purely innate. There's circumstances that have contributed to this. And by sharing that, that's where I feel I've really bonded and connected with many people who might have had similar life experience themselves.
I can say honestly that I used to be like that. And part of it is building the environment of people who I trust to run the company when I'm not here. And because the company was small and nascent, obviously that wasn't there in place immediately. But in the last 3-4 years, I have been able to I'm taking intentional. I'm doing cruises because you have to disconnect. So full week at a time, completely disconnected, other than maybe like a 15-minute email scroll through and see, okay, there's nothing I need to handle. I love that. And I think that there is something to say for that. I mean, that's a little bit off topic, but I would just say, I encourage you to actually take a vacation where you could disconnect. Yes, there's a lot of stuff waiting for you, but you also want your people to be well rested and to disconnect. So my 2 cents there. So back to your leadership, like you said, you went into these high level roles very early in age. What was your biggest challenge to leadership?
Well, the first role where I became an executive, I was 24 years old and a new mother. My first child, he was only 3 months old at the time. And I came with deep operational experience. I'd been working for a bank throughout university and stayed there for about 5 or 6 years when I got recruited out into the world of outsourcing. And so, and there's a reason why they chose me around. I'd been running large contact centers, financial services, whom were many of their clients. But I had to make the shift as the COO, who I had every functional area except for finance reporting into me. And so it was a place I was unfamiliar with. Yes, I dealt with technology, but I worked for a big bank. Someone over there, we log a ticket, it's going to get done. But now needing to lead it and make decisions, the pure sales, business development function, client management function. So the big challenge for me beyond the imposter syndrome, because I was so young and in this stretch role, was around leading across all of these other areas that I didn't have familiarity with. And I needed to really quickly get into a place where I could say, I don't know what I don't know, but I'm going to find it. I'm going to find out as I would speak to clients in particular. And otherwise, internally, it meant hiring and trusting the people with that incredible skill set that I didn't have. And that's actually a big part of where I also, began to be so focused. And this is over 20 years ago now. So before kind of DEI was as popular as it is and, dedicated employee resource groups. And that's where I realized the value of having a very diverse group around me, not only with different lived experience and work experience, backgrounds, working from different industries. That's where I tapped into it. And I had to do it exceptionally quickly and also learn to ask for some support and help from people who'd gone, long before me and who'd been in those types of roles longer, to ask them some questions and guidance. And again, be okay with recognizing I wasn't going to have all the answers.
So you brought up imposter syndrome a couple of times. So for a manager bringing up somebody from the ranks, you already prefaced that sometimes they aren't the best leaders, but as they get in there, they're trying to develop them, and they do have the upcoming leader does have imposter syndrome. What kind of advice would you give to a manager who's trying to, develop that person?
Sometimes I'm not sure if the leaders are aware, quite honestly, of how they're leading their teams. And so a big part of it is self-awareness. I'm a very resilient person myself. I live by the unstoppable philosophy. I sign most of my social media posts, #unstoppable. And a big part of that journey has been hyper self-awareness and reflection. And so that's the first thing I do with those leaders, is to really get them to understand themselves in this role, and what's contributing to their own self-belief, that they're imposters, and making sure that I build them up. Some of that will be sharing my story where I took such a stretch role, and what did I do to help complement in the areas that I had skill gap, and to work with them and developing that kind of plan with them. And the next thing is getting exceptionally clear for them to then message with their employee around the outcomes or deliverables that are expected. Let's be really clear on how success is measured here in this organization and this role specifically, so that they can be more effective as leaders coaching their teams.
Great advice, sage advice. So one thing I wanted to ask you about, when I read the Turnaround Queen, tell me about that.
So I've been a part now of 18 mergers or acquisitions or related transactions within the companies I've worked for. That doesn't include the ones I might have supported clients with, as well as often taking distressed markets or businesses within the organizations I worked for. I'm not a status quo girl by any stretch of the imagination. I'm the type who would break something almost just to be able to fix it. So I'm often parachuted into those situations, an incredible amount of tenacity, and also having worked now as a general manager and having touched across all functions, I can bring that experience to the table. And so that nickname came many, many years ago. There was one company in particular where we ended one joint venture, rebrand, went public, acquired 6 companies in 18 months. And each of that required, and I was leading operations across, it was a global company, but the Americas at that time, and the operation side of things is where the majority of the people sat and the cost, therefore, of the business. So there was just a significant amount that I needed to do. Some of the businesses we acquired weren't super profitable, but had great clients. And so needed to quickly figure out the synergies and how to bring them in, leveraging more of a shared service model, but also understanding deeply where relationships sat with the people that came to us in the acquisition and the relationships they had with clients. So as a result of doing that on a number of occasions, I got that nickname, and I wear it proudly. I am the type who I wouldn't ever want to be in pure maintenance mode, not for a long period of time anyways. I just want something new, exciting, and challenging in front of me.
I can tell your voice inflection just totally changed talking about that. So what's a shared service model?
Shared services are when companies look at, I always say, what's your superpower? And what is the business you're in, whether it's making a product or delivering services to clients. So it could be, I work for Accenture currently, and we have 4 service lines. We do interactive, think marketing and user experience, strategy and consulting, outsourcing of operations, and technology. And we're a people-based business. So there's things within that mix that you wouldn't want, isn't our superpower. So things like corporate functions, finance and accounting, some elements of procurement, some portions of marketing, of HR. We'd rather not take some of our higher valued staff to focus on things that are often quite transactional. And let's keep them focused on delivering high value, whether it's in a corporate function job where your clients are internal colleagues, or directly to consumers. And so building what many companies call a global business services or shared services center. And then you've also got one process end to end, regardless of where around the globe you are, and consistency. And ideally, you can then look at things like automation and further process improvement. And many companies look to place that in lower cost locations where, being close to client isn't as important.
Yep, that makes perfect sense. And I would think that some of that automation and systematization, it would also equate to cost savings. Wow, that took a long time to come out.
Yeah, and it's something that's really, tough for many companies. I will say that the pandemic has changed a lot of companies' minds. I'm spending a significant amount of my time and my team with our client companies looking at cost takeout that would have been almost a sacrilege to move, let's say, portions of HR into a shared service center, because it's like, well, they're engaged with our people. But 60% of the interactions that come into an HR contact center are related to payroll or benefits. Most of that actually can't be automated. But why wouldn't you want to put that in a center where it's highly, we're looking constantly at the process to improve it, we've automated it, and those that need to handle it are in a lower cost location. So it can garner like 30 to 60% savings. So that's what's got companies who weren't doing it before very much exploring it now.
30 to 60%. That's huge. That is absolutely huge. Do you support business owners with stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big part of, I've never been the type of salesperson. And although I've been in executive role, we are all selling our business all the time, regardless of what your title is. So, I'm engaging constantly with leaders of other businesses, and I'm trying to ask them first and foremost, like, what's the problem you're solving for? Actually, I asked them the question I just said, to you for leaders, how's success measured? Like, I want to make my clients successful. How are you measured? What are the pain points you're having? And then go in and help build some programs like that, building out the shared service model. And sometimes it's a multi-year journey. Like, we're not looking to flip the switch overnight because we want to manage the change accordingly. And sometimes you want to manage some of it with attrition versus doing a reduction in force and things like that. It's been a majority of my career spent doing those kinds of activities, and it gets me pretty excited, as you can see.
I can tell. So, Victoria, what have I not asked you that I should have asked you?
Well, on the diversity topic, you haven't asked me to go in detail or in more depth there. What I would say on that topic is there's a maturity curve to DE&I within an organization, and I think there's still a lot of companies that are at the early stage where they're doing it because it's the right thing to do versus recognizing the business results it actually drives. That it's a not only responsible thing to do, but it drives incredible business outcomes. That there's data that proves that having a not just diverse workforce, but really inclusive where people feel like they belong. That drives up productivity, which increases profitability, but other things like innovation, because we're all coming at a problem we're solving from a very different lived and work experience, drives significant benefits. Even at the board level, when you look at having a diverse board for companies, the level of risk mitigation actually decreases significantly. So again, you've got a stronger board by doing it. So I would encourage your listeners to, I'm sure many are doing this, but to try and move that needle forward, less so because we know it's the right thing to do, but rather because it actually drives solid business results. I do get frustrated when I hear some executives talk about the cost of developing these kinds of employee resource or business resource groups or doing something different in the talent acquisition front. That money is well served, and there's a significant return on their investment or ROI for doing that.
I agree. There's there is clearly an initial output of money to get a program like that up and running. But if you think about it, the same thing goes for your cybersecurity. When you first set it up, you've got to put that money in, that work in, that time in. And then, a lot of times people don't look at cybersecurity as a cost savings, but I promise you, if you've ever been hacked, it is.
100%. Exactly.
So, Victoria, how can our listeners find you after the show?
I have a website where you can find all of the content, the media that I do. I write a lot of work significantly, and I'm also a public speaker. You'll find all of that on my website, which is victoria-pelletier.com. I'll spell it. The French throws people off. Pelletier.
No problem. And I'll make sure that's in our show notes as well. You've been an excellent guest with lots of information, lots of nuggets in there. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me for today's Nurture Small Business podcast, where the focus is on business growth through technology, leadership, and people strategies. Do you have an idea for a podcast or feedback you'd like to share with me? Send me a note through my website at dcavirtual.com/contact.